Well, hello, everybody. I can see you all filing into our Zoom room. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Becht Khalil, and I am the Executive Director of United to End Homelessness with Orange County United Way. And today our community chat is going to be talking about the 2024 point in time count results for Orange County, California. In case you are from a different Orange County somewhere else in the country, we're going to be talking about Orange County, California today. I am really excited to be joined by Doug Becht. Doug is the director of the Office of Care Coordination with the County of Orange. He has a really big job. And so, Doug, as I introduce you, would you just be able to share a little bit for anybody who's watching who's not familiar with your role and what you're responsible for, what the Office of Care Coordination does? Let's start there with some context setting.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Bex, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Appreciate the time to share the point in time count. My name is Doug Becht. I'm the director of the Office of Care Coordination, which is essentially an office that's located in the county's executive office. And our office, the Office of Care Coordination, is responsible for coordinating the approach to addressing homelessness here in Orange County. The county's strategy and the county's approach. We work with all of our different county departments who play critical roles, the 34 cities here in Orange County that are so vitally important to addressing homelessness. And then equally as important, the people experiencing homelessness and the many providers that are driven to address homelessness.
So you have a really small job then. Before we dive into the point and time count, just curious if you would share just a little bit of your own personal story. How did you end up in this work and working in this sector, Doug?
Okay. So I am a social worker. Ultimately, I got my master's in social work almost 20 years ago. And for the first large portion of my career, I was working for nonprofits in New York City, where I'm from, that was focused on addressing homelessness, doing a lot of outreach work, overseeing outreach teams, overseeing shelters throughout the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan, and really found how powerful outreach, shelter, and housing can be in addressing homelessness for an individual. And then about 5 years ago, me and my family moved out here to California. And 4 years ago, I joined the county in the real interest of being in a role where hopefully my experience and my expertise can have a little bit of an impact on our most vulnerable neighbors here in Orange County.
Thank you, Doug. It's always really encouraging to hear people who are in positions like you are, who have had that grassroots experience out, boots on the ground, have done the work, and that you are bringing all of the expertise and the insights that you gained from that into the position that you hold today. And it's really good to also just have that context about what the Office of Care Coordination is responsible for the County of Orange and for our community. And so we're going to be talking about the point and time count. The data was released about a month ago. Point and time count is a huge lift for anybody who's watching who maybe hasn't been involved in a point and time count before. It is months and months and months of planning. It is a huge effort to develop the maps, to identify the hotspots, to recruit hundreds of volunteers, coordinating all of the logistics that goes into deploying well over 1,000 people across 34 cities in a 3-day span. So it is a big lift. A point in time count is required by HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so HUD says that communities that receive federal funding to address homelessness like we do have to do this count every 2 years, minimum of every 2 years. They also are the ones that state it must be done in the last 10 days in January. And I've been honored to have been a part of our point in time counts. We shorten it to PIT. So as we go through today, if you hear Doug and I referring to PIT, it is the point in time count. And so I've been a part of the PIT counts since about 2017 in Orange County. But this is the third time that the count has used the same methodology. So that's been something really important for Orange County. And as we're looking at this data, for us to recognize that we've used the same methodology in 2019, 2022, and 2024. So we are able to do some comparisons as we're looking at sort of the longitudinal information that we have about point in time counts here in Orange County. And I do want to preface that the point in time count, as I know Doug will echo, is one set of data to look at when it comes to looking at homelessness. And it is a snapshot. It is a moment in time of what is happening over that 3-day window. It is not stating that that is the entire universe of what is happening with homelessness over a 12-month period. And so I just wanted to make sure that I covered a few of these things, Doug, to help set you up as you start sharing more about the data of what we found in the 2024 point in time count. So with that said, I would love to pass over to you, Doug. We're going to do this chat a little bit differently. Doug's got some slides that he's going to present. So he's going to present the findings, and then we're going to dive into a deeper dialogue around that. And I'll be asking him some of the questions that some of you submitted in advance of today's conversation. So with that, Doug, I'll pass to you and we'll get your PowerPoint slides up for you.
Yeah, thank you. So that was a really good intro, Bex. The last part about what I'll say for me personally is, so this is, I think, my 15th or 16th point in time count. And a lot of the things that Bex mentioned are incredibly important to echo, which is that the point in time count is incredibly important for a community, but it's not the end all be all. And I know early in my career when I was doing outreach, there were times where you sort of live and die by those point in time count numbers. And I don't think that living and dying by them is the right approach. They are incredibly important. We'll get into it later, about other reports that are helpful. With that being said, there's a reason why this is an incredibly helpful activity. So the slides. So you could advance the slide. I'll be really quick on the next slide. Bex hit the nail on the head. Before we go into the data, I always try to speak to the methodology. Like Bex said, this is the third cycle in a row we've used the same methodology. Point in time counts the most impactful piece of information with a point in time count is being able to identify trends, looking at it year over year over year. And that same methodology allows us to compare year over year over our last 3 counts. Our methodology aligns with the national best practices, and also always want to highlight that we had the highest number of volunteers. It's a gigantic lift, really almost stretching the entire year for a whole host of us, including many of the cities and nonprofits, especially the county. But it's always nice to see the volunteers for the 3 days that we have the count at the end of January. If you want to move to the next slide. So our overall number, as I think I'd imagine most of you have heard already, is 7,322. So that is a significant increase. It's a 28% increase from our 2022 number. When you look at it over 5 years, since we have those 3 data points, 2019, 2022, 2019, we're seeing a 7% increase. So the line flattens out a little bit, but obviously no one wants to be seeing an increase. The unsheltered number, 4,173, is a 37% increase from our 2022 numbers. And the 3,149 of sheltered individuals is an 18% increase since the last 2 years. So the sheltered number, we always expected an increase because from 2022, because in 2022, COVID restrictions were still enacted. So we had reduced capacity at our shelters. The unsheltered number, yeah, is a significant increase. When you look at the increase over 5 years, it's actually just a 5% increase. So not that we're trying to say, oh, don't look here at the 2-year trend, look at the 5-year trend because that's a better number. But it's always important to sort of just get an understanding of where we're at over the longer period of time and at different intervals to see what's working. If you could advance the next slide. With that being said, some of the initial comparison data that we looked at here at the county to sort of get a sense of, where our increases and where our trend compares to others. We looked at our surrounding counties, and we haven't had a chance to input their 2024 data yet. Not everyone has reported that. But when you compare our trend over 5 years of 7% compared to the 20% trend over 4 years for the state, for everybody in the state, and 29% for when you combined the 4 surrounding neighboring counties of Orange County, it provides us a little bit of context and obviously makes us feel a little bit more confident that we're moving in a decent direction. We think that a large reason why there's such a difference is because of the very robust homeless service system that's been put in place here in Orange County over the last 10 years. So we would anticipate if we pulled back on those resources, didn't have shelters, didn't have permanent supportive housing, didn't have outreach teams, that we'd be seeing a much higher trajectory. And what I always try to mention with point in time counts is at the end of the day, really what they tell you is the difference between over two dots is the difference between how many people entered homelessness compared to how many people exited. If more people exited, your number goes down. If more people entered, your number goes up. We can move to the next slide. We always like to look at our subpopulations: veterans, transition age youth, and seniors. So those numbers went up in each category as well. Veterans, we've seen a 5% increase over the last year. Transition age youth, 31%. Seniors, 21%. So some big numbers there. We could keep moving. I'm going to move sort of quickly so we can get to the questions. Here's a breakdown of obviously the different service planning areas. I just want to be really clear from the county perspective. This is as granular in terms of geography as we get. We look not city by city, although we do provide numbers for that, but we feel like the regions are, north, central, and south are about as granular as we want to get, because each region really is a community of cities that folks sort of, there's unofficial boundaries that we think are good ones to set and to see trends here. We see the greatest increase in the North SPA or the North region, North Service Planning Area. Since 2022, we see 48% increase in unsheltered homelessness in that SPA, and then a 21% increase in sheltered people experiencing homelessness in shelters. That increase on the sheltered side also correlates to the additional beds being offered in the North SPA. I do want to point out that there's, like so many cities, but especially in the northern Orange County, many cities have really leaned in and made significant investments in addressing homelessness. The shelter number, although it goes up, it is an indicator of some of that increased investment. Next slide, please. When we look at household size, families, obviously that's the thing we look at on this, and unaccompanied youth, unaccompanied minors. Fortunately, we counted, we understand that this is for unaccompanied minors, a population that can be difficult at times to survey or to locate, but during the point in time count, we did not see any unaccompanied minors on the street. We did count 6 in our shelters. And then on the families, overall, we see an 11% decrease in the number of families counted in this year's point in time count. If we could advance to the next slide. Real briefly, we also look at ties, because everybody wants to know, and it's a question that I don't really feel is a fair question, but it's an important question. People's ties to the community, and it's the reason I don't think it's incredibly fair is because ties is a subjective. Everyone defines it a different way. So, but nonetheless, what we saw, and this is telling, is that the numbers have not changed. So, or the percentages haven't. So 92% of people report experiencing being in Orange County for the main duration of the time they're experiencing homelessness. That's an identical number to what we surveyed back in 2019 when we collected this data. 76% last residents in Orange County, same deal. You could advance the slide. What it shows us is that we're not seeing an influx of folks coming into our community at a greater speed to experience homelessness. I think that that's an important rumor to debunk. This one, I'll point out real quickly, 48% of people surveyed stated that they're experiencing homelessness for the first time in the last 12 months. That's a big number. That's one of the areas we really want to look at. So it's telling us that the folks that are counted here, it wasn't like they were here 2 years ago and they've just sat. So yeah, with so many of these data points, they tell you something, and what they tell you is another set of questions you should be asking and diving into. And we're excited to, and we will as the year goes on. And then next slide, I got two more, and then I'll open it up. Real quickly, disabling conditions, this is a self-reported slide, really important. Two things I'll point out here. 38% of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness reported, we were able to report that they were experiencing chronic homelessness by HUD's definition. That's a considerable decrease from 55% 2 years ago. All of our data has, over the last couple of years, has told us that that percentage is rising. This is the first time we've seen a decrease in this. It would be something I'm interested to continue to look at. It might be reflective of the outreach efforts on targeting people with longer lengths of chronicity on the street to go to shelter and housing, permanent supportive housing that we've brought on board in the county that is specifically addressing chronic homelessness. And the other area I want to mention is that last slide. It's a small percentage point, but it's a big increase. 92 people, 2.26% of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness reporting living with HIV and AIDS. That's a significant, almost a double, about a 70 or 80% increase from 2022. And we see it, the 175 folks in the shelter, another jump as well. So we're not talking large numbers in the sense of like the chronic homelessness in the thousands, but really noticeable and something that we want to look into for obvious reasons. And then lastly, we have the SPA breakdown. We could pass through that. It sort of speaks to the trends, and folks can look at that more further. The last slide we want to leave you with is, I think, the most telling slide about our current landscape here in Orange County. We looked at the two shelters we run here in Orange County, Yale and Bridges, on one particular day in April after we got the point in time counts results to get an understanding of like, okay, what's going on in our shelters? And what we saw was that 72% of the folks, which was the two shelters consisted that day, I think, of 584 people. So 72% of them, somewhere around 460, 470, were on our coordinated entry community queue. AKA, what that means is 72% of the people in the shelter had done everything they needed to do in order to move into permanent housing. And what I mean by that is they had got the appropriate paperwork together. They worked with their case manager. They're doing what they needed to do. and they were just waiting for housing. But only 1 out of every 12 of that 72% on that day were connected to housing. So 11 out of 12 of that 72% had done everything they needed to do, but we didn't have a place to put them. And from my work with so many partners here in the county that run shelters, our numbers are not different than other shelters. The challenge here in Orange County is that people are experiencing homelessness, want to end their homelessness. They work with our system by and large, but we don't have enough housing to put them into, or to provide for them, not put them into, but provide for them. And I think that's, if I was required to have only one takeaway from this point in time count, I think that's the big one, is that we have a backlog, and what that causes, and I just want to expand on it a little further, is so all those people waiting for housing, in an ideal world, we'd have that housing for them, we'd move them in, and then there'd be 400 plus additional units of shelter that now new people can move into. And not only would they be off the street, but we know that folks generally work quicker and faster towards permanent housing when they're in shelter. That doesn't mean we don't work with them towards that while they're on the street, but we know that that's a more efficient way to get them into shelter. So it just backlogs all the way down down the system, and has reverberating effects for everyone when we can't move people quick enough. With that being said, yeah, thank you, everyone. And Bex, I'll pass back to you.
Thank you, Doug. That was a really great kind of whistle-stop tour of the point in time count report. And I know that in the chat box there, we have popped the link to the full report. There is it's about 25 pages of data that's come out of the point in time count. So if anybody hasn't seen the full report, the link is there. We will be sending out a follow-up email to everybody who's attended. So we will make sure that any links and data that's presented today will be in that follow-up email for everybody who's attended and who RSVP'd. There's so many different directions that we could go into to talk about this, Doug. But I think the first question, it's a three-parter.
Okay.
So I'll help us. But you have obviously, like, out of anybody in the county, you have sat with this data the most and thought about it the most. And so I would love to hear from you as you've been reflecting on this. The first part of the question is, what from the data made you hopeful? Then the second part is, what's made you curious? You mentioned that when we look at this, it leads us to ask more questions and ask more questions. So really, I'm curious to hear what you're curious about from the point in time count. And then the third part of that is, what from the data has caused you to have concern that you think as a community we really need to be paying attention to? But we'll start with what made you hopeful.
What made me hopeful, and it's really the last thing I touched on, which was the amount of folks that have in our system, that 72%. I think we who work in the field day in and day out know that folks are interested in addressing their homelessness. But it's sometimes hard to contextualize that. And the data point that we were able to pull from our shelters that I know is reflective of all shelters throughout Orange County, although it only represents our 2. That's what provides me the hope, is that our system is working in a lot of ways. We've seen over 2,300 people exit to permanent housing just in the last year alone. So the system's working. What makes me curious, I'll be very specific, is that data point that I showed around chronic homelessness decreasing among those experiencing unsheltered homelessness. It's the first time, like I said, that we've seen the trend go that way. If I see a second dot that continues that trend, that would then be my hopeful, my hopeful one. But I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll continue to see that. But I'm really interested to continue to look at that. And then there's, whenever you see a large increase, there's a handful of data points that you look at where you're reflective and you want to know more about. And I think the overall increase I think many of us thought that there was a chance that there was going to be an increase. I think the 7,322 number was a little bigger than I anticipated. There is another number that we didn't present today, but it's a little bit more specific, which is, thinking about very specific areas, is the amount of veterans that are in. So our veteran number overall went up. And I'd say this curious is probably the right term for all of this data. And I'm curious because I'm concerned. The veteran number went up, but when we look at the amount of veterans in our shelter system, they actually went down from 2 years ago. So that means not only did our veteran number go up, but the percentage of veterans experiencing homelessness are experiencing that on an unsheltered piece. So we have so many veteran services that the county, federal government, our partners put towards helping our veterans, as it should be. And this is a curious data point that we don't have, that the number of folks in our shelter is shrinking with veterans. I mean, that can mean maybe, trying to be positive about it, that once veterans move into the shelter, it's sort of a fast track into permanent housing. So that's why the number's a little lower in shelter. But yeah, there's a lot to think about there. So I could go on forever with almost every data point. And then the one where the people living with HIV and AIDS, that's incredibly concerning. That number's going up. I hope part of that number going up is potentially due to the level of comfort people feel and the destigmatization of living with HIV and AIDS, that might mean that we're getting a clearer report on that, where maybe in the past people wouldn't share that information. That would be the only reason the uptick would be in a positive light. And even that, I think I've chosen poor words to describe that, but that's something I'm really concerned about as well.
Thank you, Doug. The veterans piece definitely made me both, I think, similar, concerned and curious. And I know that the Veterans Committee of the Continuum of Care, I'm currently the chair of that committee, and we're going to be doing a bit of a deeper dive into the veteran-specific information from the point in time count. So I'd say to anybody who's watching, if you are really interested in the veterans conversations, those meetings are open. They're open meetings, and so anybody would be welcome to come and to hear that ongoing dialogue around veteran-specific information. And the info on the Veterans Committee for the Continuum of Care can be found on the COC website, that I'm sure the team is going to drop into the chat box for anybody who's interested. You just have to scroll all the way down to find the Veterans Committee at the bottom, because they're in alphabetical order. A couple of other things that I just, as you were talking through, and pieces that have also jumped out to me, is the rise in senior homelessness and the rise in transitional age youth homelessness. And Doug, I'd love to just hear you expand a little bit more on those.
So yeah, as we look at those numbers a little closer, it's another area that's sort of concerning here. And as I sort of flip to my notes on those, I want to piggyback real quickly on what you said about the Veterans Committee. What's exciting is just a reminder, the point in time count is an exercise required by HUD for continuum of cares. So our COC is critical. I know that people often view my position, because I work for the county, and when I speak, they think the county's speaking, which I am. But the COC is an incredibly important partner in this. They really lead these efforts around the point in time count. And at our last COC board meeting, we have many committees, and each one of those committee heads committed to looking at their specific subpopulation and digging deeper into those numbers. So just the same thing that Becht said about the veterans, there's other groups doing that same exercise. So please, if you want to be a part of the conversation, the COC is the best place to be for that conversation. When we look at the vets and the transition age youth, the transition age youth and seniors, one thing I'll mention, a positive note, when you look at seniors experiencing unsheltered homelessness, The 413 represents a 2% decrease from 2019, which is a plus, but it also represents a 38% increase from 2022. And the transition-aged youth, we're seeing increases yet again, a significant increase of folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness between the ages of 18 and 24, a 49% jump from 2022. So with all of these subpopulations, the question is why? And it gives us an opportunity to really take a look at and decide, do we need to be putting more resources towards that? The challenge always is the answer is always yes. But the challenge is when when you're working in a system as large as we're all working in, and we have limited resources, and it looks like resources are going to become even more limited. This is where advocacy and being part of the conversation is so incredibly important as we make critical decisions on where limited funding is going to go, and which groups are going to benefit a little bit more from that funding than others. So yeah, I'd say this is sort of my plug for folks to lean into the conversation.
Thanks for bringing up advocacy. One of the other things that really kind of jumped out to me again when you were going through those slides was the difference between the sheltered population and the unsheltered population by SPA, and sort of the disproportionality that we saw, particularly in the South region of Orange County. So north, there was about 1,646 unsheltered, 1,581 sheltered. So almost a 50-50 split between sheltered and unsheltered. Central, it was a little bit more disproportionate, 2,036 unsheltered, 1,418 sheltered. But when we dropped to the South region, it was 491 unsheltered and 150 sheltered. And so just curious if anybody is watching who wants to get engaged advocacy-wise around perhaps more shelter in the South part of our region. I know I'm asking you this question, but we help people advocate, so this is weird because I could probably answer, but anything you would say about getting involved in advocacy?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, A, it's incredibly important to get involved, but B, when you get involved, it's your responsibility to really truly understand what's going on in the community you're getting involved with. All three regions are so different, and communities and cities are really vary in what they're doing, but there's very few cities or communities that are doing nothing. A lot are doing a tremendous amount. And I often learn, as I meet with different cities, the different exercises that they're doing that I was not aware of. The challenging part with this data is that speaking with a lot of cities, they've made significant investments and these results don't reflect those investments. And the question is like, how do I explain this to my community? We have invested in all of these resources, and which, it's always what you're showing me is that the number has gone up or the number didn't go down enough. And I think that the important part is to what we spoke about before. Looking at the trend is important. This is a slice in time. And I think it's important to note, listen, when I was doing outreach years ago, and I was doing it 5 days a week, at least 8 hours a day, I knew every nook and cranny of my area in the Bronx. And when the point in time came out year and year and year, there was areas that people were counted that I was like, no way, or I've never seen folks. What we saw here was a lot of folks were homeless for the first time. So I think I would be hesitant to say that the results are wrong and that, clearly people weren't counted in those areas, or those, they weren't counted correctly. I take that serious and I take the information back, and as an outreach team, look to see how we could connect with people better. On the flip side, I'd also wouldn't get completely down about it. I think it's important, you guys know your communities the best, and it's really important to understand that, you know, what you see day to day may not be lying to you. And the important piece is that if you didn't make that investment, there would be more people experiencing homelessness and unsheltered homelessness in the community. Making the investment, no one makes an investment into a single shelter, a single outreach team, you know, a single permanent supportive housing and says, okay, yeah, this is going to end it for us. You know, they make it to serve a certain amount of individuals. And that's really helping us sort of get people out the back door when they've already entered into homelessness. But we know that homelessness, like so many other things in life, there's a front door to that. And people, as we're helping people go out the back door, there's people coming in from the front door. So, you know, it's really important that we look at prevention, which is incredibly difficult, you know, and that we take all of these pieces of information, you know, with some balance. But back to the advocacy part, this is why you need to be part of the conversation. And you need to be talking to, you know, your local officials, be in the COC meetings to understand, to educate, and to voice your educated opinion about, you know, what you're seeing and what you're not seeing, and where it's really important. Because, you know, yeah, there are people out there advocating. What I'll say is that there's people advocating out there for less spending, that this money isn't well spent, or that permanent housing doesn't work. And the numbers it's just not accurate. You know, so when educated folks are advocating around homelessness, they're often advocating for the right things, but we need more folks, you know, going to their communities saying that housing, you know, building housing is something that they welcome in their community.
Goodness, there were so many things I want to jump off there. So I'm going to do my best to respond in a cohesive manner to that, because there were so many fantastic points that you made, Doug. The first, when it comes to advocacy, if anybody watching here hasn't attended, we offer 2 classes as United to End Homelessness. We offer a homelessness 101. So as Doug was talking about, like educating yourself to understand the system and sort of what's going on, that's a fantastic place to get that sort of base level of education. And then we also offer an advocacy 101 class. So if you are tuning in today and you're like, I'd love to get involved in advocacy, but what does that actually mean? And that sounds scary. Come to our Advocacy 101 class, where we'll help make that really simple. And we also, we reach out to people, we invite people into opportunities to advocate. So we will make it as easy as possible for anybody that's curious about engaging in that way. And I want to come back when you were talking about, you know, that sort of full spectrum of how a local city could be investing in homelessness, and highlight that. Oftentimes people will say to us, I want to know what my city is doing. And so we've really encouraged people, you know, to find out from your city, are they investing, are they providing funding in homelessness prevention? And then from there, what are they doing around outreach? Do they have a specialized team on staff at the city? Do they contract to a provider to do outreach? What does their law enforcement response look like? Do they have specialized officers? Or don't they? Do they using the sheriff's department? Like, learn what their city's doing in the outreach arena. Is there an emergency shelter, or have they partnered with another city where they're providing funding for an emergency shelter? Do they provide funding for rapid rehousing? Do they have a public housing authority? If they do, how are they using special purpose vouchers? Do they have affordable housing? Do they have permanent supportive housing? So it is that full range that a city could be investing in. And it's really important to understand and to try to paint that picture across the board of how that city is involved, and then using your voice to either encourage them to do more or invest in the little places where perhaps they've missed it. And so we would be honored to talk more with anybody further about how to get engaged in that. A couple of things that you mentioned were around numbers of people exiting homelessness. And the point in time count, as you've mentioned, and rightfully so, doesn't track that. So it is the point in time count cannot tell us how many people have ended their homelessness in a year, because it's just telling us the number of people experiencing homelessness as this little moment. And this was one of the questions that we received when we were, inviting people to attend. They get the opportunity to write in their questions. And so one of the questions that we had was, why are so many people still unhoused when we're doing all of these programs and money is being spent? And sort of isn't the fact that we still have people that are unhoused a sign that it's not really working? And so, Doug, I'd love for you to respond to that.
Yeah, yeah, I feel a whole bunch of ways about it. So, homelessness it's just such a dynamic social issue. People fall into it for variety of reasons. People end it through a variety of approaches. Everybody has a different path into homelessness, and everybody has a different path out of homelessness. And I think where we as a community and a society trip up the most is we're always looking for the one reason, the silver bullet that will end it, or look for the one reason why the number is going up or it's not going up. And then when we provide that, the next person is going to tell us why that one reason isn't wrong, and they provide another reason. And that reason's probably right too, but it's yet again, we can't look for one specific reason. We can look for top reasons though. I think I articulated, I think the top reason in the deck here, which was we don't have enough housing to place people into. At the end of the day, homelessness is cured. The being labeled homeless has only one definition. It means you either have a home or you don't. And it's incredibly important to remember that. So if we're able to provide people homes, they're no longer experiencing homelessness. With that being said, they have to be the right homes, and they have to surround the people with the services that'll help them be stable in that. And we all agree upon that, and we've built a system that provides that. That's why over 80% of the folks that move into the housing that this system has created are still there 2 years later, because the right housing was built for the right people with the right supports. So to your question, Bex, around, hey, listen, we've invested in all of these resources, yet the number is growing. And the number growing clearly shows that those resources aren't working. I have a fundamental issue with that. And that fundamental issue is that, so I'll use a specific example. So if we've built permanent supportive housing, 50 units of permanent supportive housing, all of our permanent supportive housing that we've built, they're full throughout Orange County. We don't have a single permanent housing opportunity that comes into our homeless service system that isn't utilized by an individual. And those opportunities end people's homelessness. You could go to permanent supportive housing buildings. They're the best example. And you go there and you see people living there that are no longer homeless. So to me, that money works. We could debate about the cost of it and the challenge of it. And those costs, I think, that debate has some merit. But to say it's working or it's not working, our system's working. I think the challenge with our system in its most basic ways is the amount of resources that we have is being outpaced by the amount of people coming into homelessness, plain and simple. Like I said, I put it plain and simple, but with that being said, I'm not saying that all we need to do is build, a community of houses and shove people in there somewhere. No, they have to be the right resources. They have to be tailored to those folks. But I think people don't give our system enough credit that when we talk about we have to build housing, that we mean we have to build the right housing. And that we have to build the housing that works for people that that people will accept, that people will thrive in. We mean that when we say we need to build more housing. It's just sort of an obvious statement, but sometimes people beat us over the head and say, no, well, they have to have support. And we go, yeah, we know that we build that type of housing. So, yeah.
Thanks, Doug. One of the critiques that's out there about sort of the housing first approach to
Yeah.
addressing homelessness. For anybody who doesn't know what housing first approach is, I'll give a quick crash course. It means that you provide somebody with housing and support services to end their homelessness. And one of the critiques that's out there is that if housing first worked, then the numbers of people experiencing homelessness wouldn't go up. I think that's where I'm excited to hear you dig in, and I'm just going to underline and underscore and highlight this and say housing first is a solution when somebody is already homeless. Housing first is not an approach to prevent homelessness. Housing first is how we resolve it. And so you just cannot equate increase in homelessness with housing first not working. And that's where the focus on prevention and the dialogue about how do we stop people from falling into homelessness. And our point in time count data showed us over 48% of people are experiencing homelessness for the first time. That is where we need to be talking and focusing resources. It doesn't mean that we stop trying to resolve homelessness for people who are out on the streets right now, but we need to be doing both, stopping people falling into homelessness and continuing the great work that, as you're talking about, Doug, that is happening, that is underway. We need to keep that going. We need more of it, but we also need to stop people falling into homelessness.
Yeah, I appreciate it. The housing first piece is a good example of a couple of things. I would say that's a classic example when I say, please become educated before, when you're advocating on something, because unfortunately, housing first has become a lightning rod term. Here in Southern California, across the state and across the country. Because people think it's housing only, and that's not what it is at all. It's based on saying, hey, people are probably going to be able to not only end their homelessness, but address so many of the other challenges in their life. They have a home that they could go home to every night and work out of it. It speaks about providing people with the right resources when they're housed, providing people with options. So it's become a lightning rod and it's frustrating, but it also speaks, we have to be reflective as a homeless service community. We have to take a look in the mirror as well, because obviously we might not have done a good enough job educating the community in general about something like housing first, or we use a term to that's one that we haven't done, like I said, done a good enough job educating, which is why I really appreciate what United Way does in terms of educating folks. One of the things we've done here at our office and at the county is to do a little bit of a better job is to sort of strip away some of the the labels to really just speak specifically about what we're looking for. So instead of saying housing first, we say, we believe people should have a home so that they have the ability to address their, whether it's mental illness, substance use, medical issues in a much better and likely more successful way. We believe people should have options, because we understand that just because you're experiencing homelessness doesn't mean you're just going to take anything, anywhere, anytime. Our data shows that. And when you strip away those labels and you talk about things like that, I think the room, there's a lot more consensus in the room. They're like, yeah, we agree with that. That's how we should go. And we waste less and less time debating things that we probably already agree upon, and we start our energy on things that we need to be focusing on.
Thank you, Doug. Another question that came in through the info that we got, and one that I think is important to look at, is connected to the information that we have around disabling conditions and sort of health things. And I want you to talk to this, because I think it's really important that people understand that the question, like what we can take from this data, particularly around, substance use, physical disability, serious mental illness, development disability, all of these things that we're looking at. And these are often things that people say are causes of homelessness. But I know that this data is not reflecting why somebody fell into homelessness. And so I would just like you to underscore like what we can take away from this and what we can't.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think we don't want to look too deep into it. I think, listen, mental illness, substance use, physical disability, if someone's experiencing that and they end up experiencing homelessness, that plays a role. That's not why they became homeless often, but that plays a role. People experience these at the same intensity and maintain their housing. And often that's related to their financial or safety net system in their personal life. What this data tells me, and I try to keep it sort of simple, is that the people we're trying to serve are experiencing these issues. We want to try to help in those areas. We want to try to help them now while they're experiencing their homelessness. When they're in our shelters, we don't want to just provide shelter, but we want to make sure that we provide services that might help them with those issues while they're in shelter, and the same with permanent housing. That people who are experiencing homelessness are experiencing a handful of challenges in their life. And if we're only going to look at one of them, we might not be doing them the best service, and we might not reach the goal at what we'd like to, which is providing them, being able to help them get into a stable living environment where they could thrive. So I think I look at these numbers more of, okay, what do we need to do moving forward? And a lot less, and not at all at, see, this is validation of that homelessness is due to X, Y, or Z. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we talk about in our homelessness 101 class, and something that I think is so important for how things are communicated to the public, is that what causes somebody to fall into homelessness is not, you cannot equate that then with the barriers that they might be experiencing now, and the reverse. So the challenges that somebody might be experiencing now while they've been homeless, perhaps say for 6 months, 2 years, 10 years, during that time frame, as somebody is surviving on the streets, it is highly likely that they are going to have more and more barriers and challenges and health concerns and health issues the longer that they're experiencing homelessness. But that does not mean that that is why they became homeless in the first time. And so I do think for everybody watching, it's so important to know, as Doug was saying, that using this information not to equate as to why people fall into homelessness, but using this information to say, how does our system need to respond? How are we making sure that we are addressing this, providing safe places and the right level of care for people who are experiencing these health challenges? And so,
Well, yeah, I'd add that, I don't want people taking it away. This also speaks to what we need to be doing on the prevention side. When people are experiencing, substance use, that is going to make them more likely to fall into homelessness. So and I see a lot of colleagues on here from our healthcare agency that day in and day out do incredibly important prevention work and helping people thrive in the housing that they're currently in, and addressing mental illness and substance use is going to really help people avoid becoming homeless. But just because you have a substance use, it doesn't mean all of a sudden, boom, you're experiencing homelessness, and sort of the judgment and stigma that has with that. This data should be a call to action and a validation for why it's important that we're offering not just people experiencing homelessness, but those that aren't, with the proper resources to address, and to address mental illness, to address substance use, to address physical issues that are going on in their life. But to put one, I think what we fear is that people they anchor onto one data point and they say, see, and when they say see, it usually comes with a judgment. That's an unfair judgment. When really we should be focusing on, continuing to help folks with the challenges that they're experiencing.
thanks, Doug. And referencing that we need to be looking at more than one data point. Are there other data sources or reports that you would recommend to people who are watching today? And then we'll circulate the links. But what else would you recommend to people who are hungry to learn more, become educated?
So there's a couple of ones, and there's one that popped into my head that's a random one, but that's like a smaller one to a specific community that I know is a good one. What I'll start out is the COC. So most of the data around how we address homelessness or the type of services that are provided in our community, like many communities, is in our HMIS, Homeless Management Information System. And 211, which is a part of United Way, is the HMIS lead. And they have a website that shows a couple of different reports that we send up to HUD each year about the work here in the community. One's the longitudinal system analysis that really provides us with the ability to see how our system's doing. The other's the system's performance measure. Similar, but they slice the data a little differently. And that gives us the real general stuff. The random, the other pieces is that there's a lot of different, I know that on the city level, a lot of cities generate different dashboards, public-facing dashboards that show their work. I think Newport Beach has a really solid dashboard that they show that shows the work that they're doing. Anaheim, there's a whole host of cities, and that's where I'd go on folks' websites and on cities' websites. But the main one, if you're looking for just one, it would be to go on that HMIS website. That'll show you what's going on across the county. I also would say that we're not hitting it out of the park in this region either. I think that this is an area where I think we could do better, which is, it's challenging. I say think we could do better, but this is something I'm in and day out. And organizing this data is really, really challenging. But I think this is an area where we need to do better in terms of being able to publicly show through data the impact that our system's having. So that is something I know we're working here at the county on, and that many of the folks that do this work are doing the same.
Thanks, Doug. And a couple of other reports that I want to kind of mention is statewide. I'm gonna get the name of this.
HDIS. Yeah,
the Feinhoff study.
Oh yes.
It was released last year.
Mm-hmm.
Huge study on what's happening in California. Very similar trends to what we're seeing in Orange County. And then the unsheltered survey that was done here in Orange County last year. Another great data set to look at. I don't know if you want to reference that one, Doug.
Yeah, we did a survey here at the county with the commission, a whole host CityNet to look at go deeper into some of the questions we asked in the point in time count of those experiencing unsheltered homelessness to better understand their experience, their preference, how we could shape our system better. Yeah, the UC San Francisco study was a statewide study that Becht was referencing that I see was put into the chat. It sort of did the same, but statewide. The state also has I know the acronym, I should know the full piece, but they have state reporting. It's HDIS. It's very similar. They collect all the HMIS or a lot of the HMIS data from all, I think, 44 COCs here in the state of California, and they combined it. So you can see at a state level, you saw it in our point in time count. We try to do our best to compare, like anyone should do, how are you doing compared to your peers, and not to say, to weigh, say, yeah, we're doing better than them or we're not, but to really see, are there areas of improvement? Can we learn something? And all of these reports are really interesting. So there are a lot of different good stuff out there.
Thanks, Doug. I've just seen the time, and I wish that we had another 30 minutes to keep chatting because there's so much in here to continue to dig in. And I can see we had a lot of questions that came in through the chat box. We might need to do a pit count part 2 discussion to see, because it's really encouraging to me to see how many people are being so engaged in this dialogue and this discussion. And I know I have to wrap us up, but as I do, Doug, is there anything that you didn't get to say about the point in time count that you think is really important as we come to a close?
I'm sure there is. but I can't think of it right now. I think everyone should go. They should look at the report that Michael put in the chat, and feel free to reach out to me or to any of us on the team or on this call if you have questions. As you can see, me and Bex are really passionate about this stuff, so we never mind sitting and chatting about it. But the report really goes over it much more thoroughly.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. Thank you for sending in questions to help shape the conversation. And this chat will go live on YouTube in the next couple of days. So you'll be able to kind of revisit it. I know there was a lot of information. The exit surveys popped up. We find those really useful for shaping our future conversations. And I thank you to everybody for your interest in helping move Orange County forward to resolve homelessness in a dignified way. And Doug, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Bex.
Thank you, everyone. We will see you next time.